What if the most powerful pharmacy that's ever existed doesn't have a storefront, doesn't require a prescription, and doesn't charge you $14 for a cold-pressed juice? What if it's been growing in ditches along roadsides, in meadows and forests, quietly, patiently, for thousands of years? Here's something most people have never stopped to consider. Every plant you're going to hear about today was already old when the Bible was written. People were using these before Rome existed, before the pyramids, before anyone dreamed up the word supplement. They weren't using them because they'd read a study. They were using them because they worked. Generation after generation passed the knowledge forward, not in books, but in hands, in kitchens, in the field. Modern biochemistry is now going back and figuring out why. In this video, 10 wild plants that your ancestors would have recognized immediately as medicine. Some grow within a mile of where you're sitting right now. All of them have real, documented effects on real systems inside your body. Stay with me through number 4, because we're going to talk about a plant so common you probably walked past it this morning, and it has been shown in peer-reviewed trials to reduce inflammatory markers more effectively than some pharmaceutical compounds. And number 1 has a history that goes back to ancient Egypt, a mention in the Gospels, and a specific antimicrobial compound that pharmaceutical researchers have been quietly studying for decades. If that's the kind of thing you want to know more of, hit subscribe now before we go any further. This channel exists for exactly this. Let's start. Number 10, Plantain Platago major. Not the banana, the weed. It's flat. It grows in every compacted, trampled, ignored patch of ground, sidewalk cracks, parking lot edges, the beaten-down path through your yard. Most people mow over it twice a week without a second thought. That is a mistake that would have baffled every healer in Europe for the last 2,000 years. Plantain Platago major appears in Anglo-Saxon herbals from the 9th century as one of 9 sacred herbs. The Norse called it the mother of all herbs. Medieval monks cultivated it deliberately in their physic gardens. Indigenous peoples across North America, with no contact with European traditions, independently arrived at identical uses: wounds, stings, inflammation, respiratory complaints. That kind of convergence across disconnected cultures doesn't happen by accident. Here's what modern analysis found inside those unassuming leaves: aucubin, an iridoid glycoside with documented anti-inflammatory activity; allantoin, a compound that actively accelerates cell proliferation in wound healing. The same compound pharmaceutical companies synthesize and put into premium skincare products. And mucilage that coats and soothes irritated mucous membranes in the throat, the gut, the lungs. When you chew a plantain leaf and press it onto a bee sting, the swelling reduces in minutes. That's not placebo. That's aucubin interacting with inflammatory pathways in your skin tissue. The plant became invisible not because it stopped working. It became invisible because it grows free in every crack in the pavement, and there is no business model for that. Pick a young leaf. Crush it. Smell it. You're holding something that soldiers used on the battlefield before penicillin existed. It deserves at least your attention. Number 9, elderberry, Sambucus nigra. Elderberry has had a resurgence. You've seen the syrups in health food stores at $28 a bottle. Before we talk about what's in them, let's talk about what this plant actually is. Elder trees line the edges of old farmsteads across Europe and North America. There's a reason for that. Farmers planted them deliberately, near the kitchen door, near the well. In Germanic and Slavic tradition, the elder was considered so medicinally important that cutting one down without asking its permission was considered bad luck. That sounds like superstition until you understand it as cultural code. Do not destroy this resource. The berries were pressed into syrups, wines, and winter preparations across every culture from Scandinavia to the Levant. Hippocrates, writing in the 4th century BC, called elder his medicine chest. That phrase survived because it was accurate. The active compounds, flavonoids called anthocyanins, specifically cyanidin, 3, glucoside and cyanidin, 3, sambubioside. These bind directly to influenza virus particles and inhibit their ability to attach to and enter healthy cells. This mechanism has been confirmed in multiple randomized controlled trials. One published in Nutrients showed that elderberry supplementation reduced the duration of influenza by an average of 4 days compared to placebo. Not shortened, cut by more than half. The flavonoids also stimulate cytokine production, the signaling proteins that mobilize your immune response, without triggering the kind of excessive inflammatory cascade that makes you feel so terrible during a bad infection. Here's what the $28 bottle doesn't tell you. The flowers, which bloom in early summer in great white clusters, are equally medicinal and essentially free. An elderflower tea made in July will do much of what the berry syrup does in January. The elder tree grows where it wants. It has always grown where people live. That, too, is not an accident. Number 8. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium. The name says everything. Achillea, from Achilles, the Greek hero who, according to Homer, used this plant to staunch the bleeding wounds of his soldiers on the plains of Troy. Whether or not you take that story literally, the fact that yarrow was woven into the founding mythology of Western civilization tells you something about how long it was understood as a wound herb. It appears in archaeological records at Neanderthal burial sites. At a site in Iraq called Shanidar Cave, researchers found pollen from 8 medicinal plants buried with human remains dating to 60,000 years ago. Yarrow was one of them. Let that sit for a moment. 60,000 years. The feathery white-flowered plant that grows in meadows, roadsides, and fields across the entire northern hemisphere has been used continuously as medicine since before Homo sapiens had written language. The knowledge was that old and that persistent. The mechanism is not mysterious. Yarrow contains achillein, an alkaloid that activates platelet aggregation, the first step in blood clotting. It also contains sesquiterpene lactones and flavonoids that reduce inflammation, and azulene, formed when the plant is steam distilled, with documented antimicrobial activity against gram-positive bacteria. The traditional application: crush fresh yarrow leaves and press directly onto a bleeding wound. The bleeding slows, sometimes stops. Field medics in multiple conflicts, before antibiotics, before sterile dressings, relied on exactly this. But yarrow was also taken internally, as a tea for fever, to stimulate digestion, to reduce heavy menstrual bleeding, to support recovery from colds. The Cherokee, the Iroquois, the Ojibwe, healers across 5 continents, all arrived at substantially the same plant for substantially the same conditions. It grows in your lawn if you let it. The question is whether you let it. Number 7. Stinging nettle, Urtica dioica. There's a particular irony here that's worth sitting with. The plant that most people's first experience with is pain turns out to be one of the most nutritionally dense and medicinally potent plants in the temperate world. Medieval European peasants did not eat nettle because they enjoyed it. They ate it because it was the first green thing to emerge in spring, before gardens were producing, after a winter of stored roots and dried grain. It kept people alive, and in keeping them alive, it delivered something their winter diet couldn't: iron, calcium, magnesium, vitamins A, C, and K, chlorophyll, and a profile of polyphenol that modern nutritional science has found genuinely impressive. Stinging nettle contains more iron per gram than beef liver, more calcium per gram than milk. That fact is not well known because nettle does not have a marketing department. The medicinal applications that have survived and been tested: nettle root extract has been studied in multiple double-blind trials for benign prostatic hyperplasia, enlarged prostate. The mechanism appears to involve inhibition of sex hormone-binding globulin, reducing the signaling that drives prostate cell growth. Several European countries recognize nettle root as a legitimate botanical pharmaceutical for this indication. Nettle leaf, separately, has documented antihistamine activity. The compound responsible, 3-aminopropyl dimethylsulfoniopropanate, inhibits several key enzymes in the inflammatory cascade triggered by allergens. A freeze-dried preparation studied in a randomized double-blind trial showed meaningful reduction in hay fever symptoms compared to placebo. Your ancestors harvested nettles with leather gloves in early spring and ate them through summer. The sting disappears entirely with cooking or drying. What remains is one of the most complete wild foods available in the Northern Hemisphere. The plant that stings you is also the plant that heals you. That's not poetry. That's biochemistry. Number 6. Dandelion Taraxacum officinale. We have spent decades and hundreds of millions of dollars on herbicides, try to eliminate from our lawns a plant that healers in every culture that encountered it recognized as a valuable medicine. Think about that. The dandelion, every part of it, root to flower, was listed in official European pharmacopoeias well into the 20th century. Traditional Chinese medicine uses it. Ayurvedic medicine uses it. Native American healers across dozens of nations used it. The Arabic physician Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote about it in the Canon of Medicine in the 11th century, which remained a standard medical reference at European universities for 500 years. The root contains inulin, a prebiotic fiber that specifically feeds beneficial bacteria in your gut, particularly Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus strains associated with immune function and reduced systemic inflammation. It also contains taraxacin and taraxacerin, bitter compounds that stimulate bile production, improving fat digestion and supporting liver function. The leaves are diuretic. They increase urine output without depleting potassium the way pharmaceutical diuretics do, because the leaves themselves are extraordinarily high in potassium. The plant essentially replaces what its own diuretic effect removes. This is not a coincidence of nature. This is a feature. The flowers contain luteolin and apigenin, flavonoids with documented anti-inflammatory and antioxidant activity. The dandelion became a weed, not because of anything it did, but because of what lawns became, a monoculture aesthetic imported from 17th century English estate gardens, where clipped grass signaled that you owned land you didn't need to cultivate. We inherited the lawn. We inherited the war on everything that grows in it. The dandelion growing through your fence has been there longer than the fence. It will be there after the fence is gone. Number 5. Hawthorn, Crataegus monogyna / oxyacantha. In medieval England, May Day celebrations were built around the hawthorn, gathering its blossoms, weaving them into garlands. The timing wasn't arbitrary. Hawthorn blooms in May, and May Day was the celebration of the heart of spring. The association between hawthorn and the heart runs deeper than poetry. Hawthorn berries, the small, deep red clusters that cover these thorn shrubs in autumn, have been used specifically for cardiovascular complaints since at least the 1st century AD. Dioscorides wrote about them. European folk medicine from Ireland to the Carpathians independently identified hawthorn as the herb for the aging, weakening heart. The mechanism took until the 20th century to identify oligomeric proanthocyanidins, OPCs, and flavonoids including vitexin, quercetin, and hypericide. These compounds act on the heart and circulatory system in several distinct ways. They dilate coronary blood vessels, improving blood flow to the heart muscle itself. They reduce peripheral vascular resistance, meaning the heart doesn't have to push as hard. They have a mild positive inotropic effect, improving the force of each heartbeat. And they reduce arterial stiffness. A meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials published in the American Journal of Hypertension found significant reductions in resting diastolic blood pressure in patients taking hawthorn extract. The European Medicines Agency formally recognizes hawthorn berry preparations as a traditional herbal medicine for symptoms of mild heart conditions. German physicians have prescribed hawthorn preparations under the name Weissdorn for early-stage heart failure and hypertension for decades. In Germany, it is not alternative medicine. It is medicine. We turn the hawthorn hedge into an ornamental border plant. The berries rot on the branches every autumn. Number 4. St. John's wort, Hypericum perforatum. Hold a leaf of St. John's wort up to the light. You'll see it dozens of tiny translucent dots across the surface of a leaf, like perforations, which is exactly what the species name perforatum refers to. Those aren't holes. They're oil glands packed with hypericin and hyperforin, the two primary bioactive compounds that make this plant medically significant. It blooms at midsummer, traditionally on or near the feast of St. John the Baptist, June 24th, which is how it got its name. Medieval healers collected it at its blooming peak, infused it in oil, and used that red oil. Hypericin turns the infusing oil of vivid crimson for wound healing and nerve pain. But the application that modern research has focused on is neurological. Hyperforin specifically inhibits the reuptake of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, the same neurotransmitter systems targeted by modern antidepressant medications, including SSRIs. A landmark meta-analysis published in the British Medical Journal analyzed 23 randomized controlled trials involving nearly 1,800 patients. The conclusion: St. John's wort was more effective than placebo for treating mild to moderate depression and produced fewer side effects than standard pharmaceutical antidepressants. The German Commission, Germany's equivalent of the FDA for herbal medicines, approved St. John's wort for mild to moderate depression in 1984. In Germany, it outsells synthetic antidepressants for these indications. Here is the part that stops people. Pharmaceutical companies cannot patent a wildflower. They can patent a molecule they synthesize, purify, and sell at markup. They cannot patent Hypericum perforatum, which grows across Europe, Asia, and North America and costs nothing to find. This is not speculation about motives. This is the structure of how pharmaceutical economics work. The plant blooms every June. Bright yellow flowers on roadsides and sunny meadows. It has been there doing what it does for a very long time. Number 3. Metasweet, Filipendula ulmaria. This is the plant that gave us aspirin. Directly. And the story of how it became aspirin and how aspirin then replaced it is worth understanding. Metasweet grows in damp meadows, riverbanks, and wet ditches across Europe and Western Asia. It produces plumes of creamy white flowers in July and August with a heavy, honey-like fragrance. For centuries, it was strewn across floors and used to flavor mead and wine, hence the old name meadsweet. Medieval healers prescribed it for fever, pain, and stomach complaints. The connection wasn't metaphorical. In 1838, a German chemist named Carl Jacob Loeg isolated salicylate from metasweet for the first time. The plant had, in its tissues, the same compound that would later be purified, acetylated, and sold as acetylsalicylic acid, aspirin. But here is what happened when the synthetic version arrived. The acetylation that made aspirin more stable also removed the buffering compounds present in metasweet, specifically the mucilaginous compounds that protect the stomach lining. Traditional metasweet preparations were actually used to treat stomach ulcers and acid reflux, not cause them. The whole plant protects the gut. The isolated compound tears at it. This is a pattern worth paying attention to. When a natural compound is extracted, isolated, modified, and resold, what gets left behind matters. What gets left behind in metasweet is the stomach protection. The metasweet plant contains salicin and spireicides alongside mucilage, tannins, and flavonoids that create a different total effect than the aspirin tablet in your medicine cabinet. It doesn't replace aspirin for cardiac prevention. Those are specific doses in specific contexts. But as a tea for headache, fever, and inflammation, it acts differently, and for many people's guts, more gently. Metasweet grows for free in any damp English or Scottish meadow. The aspirin it inspired cost the global healthcare system billions of dollars a year in stomach damage and treatment of that damage. The flower was here first. Number 2. Mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris. The Artemisia genus, named for the Greek goddess Artemis, patron of women and of the hunt, contains more documented medicinal plants than almost any other genus on Earth. Artemisia annua gave us artemisinin, currently the most effective treatment for malaria on the planet. Artemisia absinthium is wormwood, used since antiquity as a digestive bitter and antiparasitic. Artemisia vulgaris is mugwort, the common one, growing on roadsides and waste ground across the northern hemisphere. Mugwort appears in the Anglo-Saxon nine-herb charm as the oldest of herbs and the mother of all herbs. It appears in Chinese medicine as Ai, the primary herb used in moxibustion, the practice of burning dried mugwort on or near acupuncture points. This practice has been documented in China for over 2,000 years. A randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1998 found that moxibustion with mugwort was significantly more effective than positional correction alone for turning breech babies before delivery. The obstetric applications of this ancient practice are now the subject of ongoing clinical research. The plant contains volatile oils including 1,8-cineol, the same compound found in eucalyptus, with documented antimicrobial and bronchodilatory effects. It contains flavonoids with estrogenic activity, which explains its historical use across many traditions for regulating menstruation. It contains sesquiterpene lactones with antiparasitic activity. Mugwort was woven into belts and worn by Roman soldiers on long marches, specifically to prevent fatigue. This sounds like folk magic. Transdermal absorption of volatile compounds through the skin during sustained physical exertion is a real phenomenon. This is the roadside weed with the silvery undersides on its leaves. It grows in every country in the temperate northern hemisphere. It has been medicine for longer than most civilizations have existed. Number 1. Garlic, Allium sativum. Wild ancestor, Allium ursinum. We save this for last. Not because it's flashy, because it's the most important. Ramsons, bear's garlic, Allium ursinum. This is the wild ancestor of the garlic in your kitchen, the plant that carpets ancient woodland floors across Europe in spring, filling the air with the unmistakable smell before you even see the white star-shaped flowers. But let's be precise about what we're talking about, because the history here demands it. Garlic, in its cultivated and wild forms, is mentioned in the Bible. Numbers 11:5, where the Israelites wandering in the desert cry out for the foods they had in Egypt. Cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. They weren't just expressing homesickness for pleasant flavors. They were expressing grief over the loss of medicine. Garlic was central to Egyptian health practice. The Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BC and containing some 700 medical formulas, includes garlic in no fewer than 22 separate prescriptions. The pyramid builders were given garlic daily, not as a treat, as a nutritional and medicinal staple. When the supply was interrupted, according to ancient accounts, there was nearly a labor strike. Hippocrates prescribed garlic for pulmonary complaints, parasites, and infections. Roman soldiers carried it. Crusaders carried it. Pasteur confirmed its antibacterial properties in 1858. During World War I, when antibiotics didn't exist and battlefield infections were killing more soldiers than bullets, the British government purchased tons of garlic to pack into wounds. None of this is folklore. All of it is documented. Now here is what is happening inside the garlic, because this is where the story becomes extraordinary. Raw garlic contains alliin, a sulfur-containing amino acid that is inert on its own. When garlic is cut, crushed, or chewed, a separate enzyme called alliinase, held in different cellular compartments, comes into contact with alliin. The reaction produces allicin, a volatile sulfur compound with antimicrobial activity against a documented range of bacteria, including MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, the superbug that pharmaceutical antibiotics are increasingly failing against. Multiple studies have confirmed that allicin disrupts bacterial cell membranes and inhibits two essential enzyme systems in bacteria, including the same cysteine proteases that MRSA uses to evade immune response. Crucially, bacteria have not developed resistance to allicin the way they develop resistance to synthetic antibiotics. The mechanism of action is too broad, too diffuse, too multi-targeted for simple resistance mutations to overcome. There's more. A gene, another compound formed from allicin, has shown in vitro activity against certain cancer cell lines, specifically inhibiting PI3K/ACT signaling, a pathway overactive in several types of human tumors. The research is early. The signal is real. 4. Cardiovascular health. Meta-analyses of multiple randomized controlled trials have found that aged garlic extract significantly reduces systolic and diastolic blood pressure, reduces LDL cholesterol, reduces triglycerides, and slows arterial stiffness. The mechanism involves hydrogen sulfide production. Garlic helps your blood vessels produce this gaseous compound, which relaxes smooth muscle and arterial walls. And for the gut, garlic's prebiotic fructooligosaccharides selectively feed lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species, while its antimicrobial compounds suppress pathogenic bacteria. This is not a simple story. Raw garlic in large amounts can be disruptive to gut flora. Aged, fermented, or cooked garlic tells a more complex and gentler story. Here is what the wild version, Allium ursinum ramsans bear's garlic, offers that the kitchen cultivar doesn't. It grows before anything else in early spring, in old woodland, accessible to anyone who learns to identify it. Bears seek it out in spring specifically to detoxify and restore digestive function after winter. That behavior has been observed and recorded across multiple continents. The bears, it turns out, knew something. The thing about garlic is this: there is no more researched medicinal plant on Earth. There are more peer-reviewed studies on garlic and its compounds than on most pharmaceutical drugs. And despite this, or perhaps because of it, it remains something you can grow in your garden, buy for a few cents a bulb, and use tonight. Pharmaceutical companies cannot patent allicin. They can synthesize it. They cannot own it. And so this plant, the one that built pyramids, survived wars, appeared in the oldest medical texts on Earth, still sits in your kitchen, waiting. You probably have one right now. These plants are not primitive remedies waiting to be replaced. They are a body of knowledge built by millions of people over thousands of years, tested not in laboratories, but in the only laboratory that ultimately matters: real human bodies in real conditions over real time. Modern phytochemistry is not discovering what plants do. It is explaining what healers already knew. There is a difference, and it matters. The knowledge came first. The mechanism came later. One thing worth saying plainly: not all garlic is garlic. Not all elderberry syrup is elderberry. Mass-produced supplements are often standardized to a fraction of the active compound content of the whole plant, grown with methods that alter the chemistry, processed in ways that destroy volatile compounds. If you're going to use any of these plants, the whole plant, fresh, dried carefully, or properly prepared, will generally outperform the convenience aisle version. This week, choose one. Just one plant from this list. If you have planted in your yard, learn to identify it. If you have elder near you, look for the flowers this spring. If you have garlic in your kitchen, start crushing it 10 minutes before cooking to give the alliinase reaction time to complete before heat destroys the enzyme. One step, one plant, one change. And tell me in the comments, which one surprised you most? And which one are you going to start with? Next time, we're going to look at something that predates all of these plants in terms of documented human use. A fermented preparation found in vessels dating back 7,000 years that may be the oldest continuously used medicine in human history. And no, it isn't wine. That one is worth waiting for.